This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Former South African President FW de Klerk dies aged 85. Boeing agrees to a deal with victims of the 2019 Ethiopia Airlines plane crash. And Sudan's military leader forms a council to guide the country's transition to civilian leadership. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the very latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. South Africa's finance minister cuts funding for state-owned enterprises in order to trim the country's budget deficit in a medium-term budget speech. And we'll review the outcomes from Egypt's 4th transportation fair, which has just wrapped up in Cairo. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Rama. Well, our top story for the hour, former South African President Willem de Klerk has died at the age of 85 following his battle with cancer. President de Klerk was the last apartheid-era president to lead the country. He's described as having played a key role in negotiating a peaceful transfer of power to a black-led government under Nelson Mandela. De Klerk won praise worldwide for his role in bringing an end to apartheid. For that, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize with Mandela in 1993. Well, Angela Koppel now joins us for more from Johannesburg, South Africa. Good to see you, Angela. Not such a great story, but Frederick de Klerk was a controversial figure in South Africa's transition to democracy, bringing joy to many black South Africans across the country for overseeing an end to white minority rule. But then, as we know, Angela, some white citizens saw his efforts to end apartheid as an utter betrayal. How are South Africans reacting to this news of de Klerk's death?
Well, people are split on his legacy. The eulogies have mostly begun, and most of them are neutral or guardedly positive, and that's mostly from the political parties. One senior newspaper editor at the time says his strong leadership, that's de Klerk's leadership, did what Foster and Botha, which were two of de Klerk's predecessors, couldn't do. We are told he also deserves his Peace Prize. That's the one you mentioned now that he got with Mandela. And it's because of him the country didn't burn. And that's apparently according to one political leader at the time. Ramaphosa, on the other hand, says de Klerk was a courageous man who went against his own party to drive reform and to unban the ANC and its associate unions. He also started negotiations with the ANC that would eventually lead to that first democratic election in the country in 1994. Some say de Klerk was actually hated by a section of the white population when he unbanned those opposition political parties. Others say good riddance. He was forced politically to adapt or die, and that's why he made those decisions. Most won't give him the time of day, in fact. And that's specifically true for the generation that lived through those apartheid times. The debate, of course, now rages on radio stations and online, but there's no sitting on the fence here. And apparently now a video has emerged that was released on de Klerk's death where he apologizes for apartheid and the damage it caused. Hannah?
Angela, de Klerk and Nelson Mandela won that Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to end apartheid. To what extent, I mean, we've got to speak about what's happening right now in South Africa, but to what extent has the dream of South Africans for a more equal and just society been achieved?
Well, look, in theory, the country has one of the world's strongest and most liberal constitutions. Everyone has rights that protect us. We're equal in the eyes of the law. We have freedom of speech. Public health and education is mostly free. There's a social security net in place to assist those most in need. And yet, economically, the majority of the population are actually not gainfully employed. We know that number is ridiculously high at the moment. Housing is lacking. Infrastructure is decrepit and breaking down. Crime is mostly out of control. State corruption continues. So economically and socially, people are not equal, and a lot of work still has to be done. The dream for many millions hasn't been realized yet, and it's unlikely to be realized anytime soon. Look, there's no question that, or doubt that we have a large black middle class, but it's outweighed in sheer numbers by the poor and poverty-stricken. Hannah?
Thank you so much for that, Angela. Angela Coppola speaking to us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Well, let's now take a closer look at the legacy of the former South African president.
Born on 1936 in Johannesburg, Frederick William de Klerk was born into a long line of Afrikaner National Party politicians. The party was an ethnic national party geared towards promoting Afrikaner interest. In 1989, he would be elected president under the party's banner. But instead of continuing the party's legacy, he helped bring an end to apartheid. In 1990, he released Nelson Mandela from jail. This led to historic elections which brought Mandela to power in 1994. De Klerk acted as one of 2 deputy presidents, and in 1997 he retired from politics.
And with my retirement, I wish to open a door for the National Party, to provide further proof of its dynamic break with the past, with a view to best enabling it to play its full role in the realignment process.
Both de Klerk and Mandela shared a Nobel Peace Prize in 1993 for negotiating an end to apartheid. But de Klerk's legacy regarding apartheid is a complex one. While he helped bring about an end to apartheid, many blamed him for failing to curb violence against blacks and anti-apartheid activists during his time in power. In response to his death, the Nelson Mandela Foundation released a statement saying, quote, "De Klerk's legacy is a big one. It is also an uneven one, something South Africans are called to reckon with in this moment," end quote. Asatal, CGTN.
Well, in other news making headlines this hour, Boeing has reached an agreement with the families of victims of the 2019 Ethiopian Airlines crash. According to a court filing, Boeing is accepting liability for the deaths in 2019. A Boeing 737 MAX crashed in Ethiopia, killing all 157 people on board. At the time of the crash, the 737 MAX was Boeing's best-selling plane. Lawyers for the victims' families noted that Boeing, under the agreement, admitted that the 737 MAX had unsafe conditions. As part of the agreement, lawyers for the victims' families can now claim compensation in U.S. courts, but will not seek punitive damages. A hearing on the agreement is set to take place next Tuesday. Well, over in Sudan, protests against last month's military takeover continue. The Sudanese Professionals Association has launched demonstrations in Khartoum aiming to resist the Sudanese military's decisions to dissolve the sovereignty and ministerial councils and arrest officials. The protesters are demanding the return of the civilian government and the removal of the military from power. The demonstrations took place at several public and private institutions in Khartoum.
We condemn the military coup. We are an integral part of the street and the revolution. We are the union and we represent them. We are an integral part of the neighborhood committees. We are ready for the revolutionary escalation at any time.
Well, to neighboring Ethiopia now, the country is currently going through a conflict that has killed thousands of people. The government and rebel forces are facing increasing pressure to lay down their arms and negotiate a ceasefire. CGTN's Guillermo Chala sat down with Bülent Seyum, the Prime Minister's press secretary.
We know that the African Union is trying to broker peace between the government and the TPLF group. Olusegun Obasanjo, former president of Nigeria, is now engaged. He is in the country. What is the government's stake of his efforts?
So, His Excellency President Olusegun Obasanjo is designated by the African Union as a special envoy for the Horn of Africa. We believe and we we are fully committed to African solutions to African problems. So we respect the decision of the African Union to make this a continental-wide effort. And by doing so, in their designation of His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo, we respect him as an elder, as a statesman that has had quite a reputation throughout the continent for bringing various groups together and conferring around issues of peace and security. We do believe that he's also well positioned to do that.
On the other hand, the UN complains that its employees have been detained by Ethiopian authorities. We've heard investigation is pending, according to the federal police, but this is more than 90 people. Why are they in custody? And what is the response that you have for the UN's complaints?
So I would have to first share with you that the United Nations is a key partner for Ethiopia as well. The United Nations is also comprised or constituted based on Ethiopia's willingness to forge a strong foundation for multilateralism as well. Ethiopia was one of the founders of the League of Nations. So having set this context for the role that Ethiopia plays within the United Nations and understanding that the role the United Nations plays in Ethiopia, we have to be very careful in positioning or viewing individuals who work within this institution and putting them on a platform that is not considering that they're not above reproach. There are many actors.
More coming up on Africa Live after the short break, including we'll look at the impact of coal-fired power in South Africa and efforts to fight climate change.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba, Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, let's now turn to China, where the CPC Central Committee has passed a landmark resolution on the history and major achievements of the Communist Party of China. It highlights the key events in the CPC's 100-year history. The resolution was adopted at the just concluded 6th plenary session. The session also passed a resolution on the convening of the 20th National Congress of the CPC. It is set to take place in Beijing during the second half of 2022. San Joan has more from Beijing.
The 6th plenary session of the 19th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China has concluded on Thursday and released a communique. Here are some of the major achievements made since the 18th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. So let's take a look at it from different aspects as it is outlined in the document. So as for the party's leadership and style and its system, the unification of the leadership has been granted and the system has been continuously improved. This has become more efficient, united, and scientific in terms of the party's leadership as well as how it has improved the system. In addition to that, the party's self-checking and self-development system has been improved, showing us in aspects such as anti-corruption. In addition to that, in terms of economic construction, the country's economic development has been significantly enhanced. It demonstrates a better quality, more efficient, fairer, sustainable, and safer measures and ways of doing this. And also that also showcased China's effort in deepening reform and opening up. The efforts on ecological and environmental protection have undergone historical, transitional, and overall changes. The strengths of border protection and capabilities to safeguarding national security has also been a huge boost in terms of strengthening military capabilities. In addition to that, to uphold one country, two systems and advance unification of the motherland, the party Central Committee has taken a series of measures to address existing issues. It will firmly implement the governance by patriotism in Hong Kong Special Administrative Region as well as in Macau Special Administrative Region. In respect to One China principle and the 92 consensus, the nation will resolutely opposes Taiwan independence and oppose any separatism acts or any interference by external forces. And with all that, the Communist Party of China and Chinese people can declare to the world that the nations have break through all the struggles and now living in a better and stronger life.
Torrential downpours in India and Sri Lanka have killed at least 41 people. In India, thousands have been transferred to safety. Many schools remain closed. The Indian Meteorological Department forecasts a light to moderate rain in most affected areas, with occasional flooding of some roads in low-lying areas. Meanwhile, in Sri Lanka, officials say that 25 people lost their lives, mostly to drowning. Well, phasing out fossil fuels is one of the key demands of this year's COP26 climate change conference. But this is a challenge for South Africa, the world's 7th largest producer and consumer of coal. In this installment of Panorama Africa, CGTN visits the country to explore the impact of coal-fired power and the potential of China-Africa cooperation in renewable energy.
Emissions from fossil fuels are the dominant cause of global warming. Phasing them out has become a global priority. In this episode of Panorama Africa, we're in one of the most fossil fuel dependent countries in the world, South Africa, where we take a look at the impact of the coal mining sector as the country's transition to renewable energy slowly gathers pace. Coal-fired electricity has lit up homes and powered the South African economy since the late 19th century. At the time, coal was plentiful and cheap. It has since become one of the most climate-costly energy sources yet, leaving a tainted legacy in its wake.
After they've extracted the coal, destroyed the environment, destroyed all our water sources, they disappeared. And here we are sitting with an environmental liability of which we pay with our health and our lives.
The city of Emalahleni, meaning place of coal, is the heart of South Africa's coal mining sector. Situated in Mpumalanga province, it holds the largest concentration of coal mines and coal power plants in the country. Each year, new mines open up, bringing them closer and closer to where low-income communities live.
Sihlukumezeke kakhulu ngale mayini. Ayisalali nasebusuku imishini igijima waya waya. Idust yona ngisakhuluma ngayo ngoba sihlala phakathi kwayo. Every day uvuka kune dust. Kusho ukuthi vele siphefumula yona, sidla yona, vele sesiphila yona. If ungacheka manje abantwana bethu, amehlo abo sewabovu kabuhlungu kwangathi abantu abadala ababhemayo abaphuzayo. Yaba affecta kakhulu lento le.
Of significance is the coal-related air pollution that is causing respiratory problems, including asthma in children.
Uqala kwa princess ukuze ngibone ukuthi bekane asthma. Waba ne-flu ngamisa esibhedlela akakhoni ukuphefumula kahle. Izinhliziyo zami ibuhlungu kakhulu ngoba angisiboni isidingo sawo la mama yini because asibenefit next kibo because abantwana bayagula izindlu ziyamosheka. So la mama yini shuthi lakithi alese just ukugula kuphela.
Local residents say they feel exploited at the expense of coal mining companies and the country's economy. Homes are easily damaged by the vibration of heavy machinery and blasting that accompanies coal mining. Homeowners have been left frustrated and desperate. In a cruel irony, the informal settlements that lie in the shadows of power stations do not have electricity. To cook food and warm their homes, many residents opt to dig for leftover inferior coal from the discarded mine dumps that sit above sinkholes. It's a risky undertaking.
And then morepa malatho go botlhoko ka re nthoela go phoshomela maphelo a batho a ya fela and le mo maoto re swele ka lebaka la re go tloga semoko se segolo ge le rua yepa go tla malatlha mantši o fetsa go tsena go bala batho bantši.
The implementation of environmental regulations and the rehabilitation of coal fields has been inconsistent, causing many serious problems to the ecosystem. The consequences are being felt years later, even where mines have long closed.
This sinkhole is plus minus 30 meters deep. It is very dangerous because in some instances there are people who died because of these sinkholes. They are very deep, and where we are, it's informal, there's no electricity, at night it's very dark. Anything can happen.
The water system has also been affected by the old coal mining sites. Matthews has lived in Mpumalanga most of his life and has seen the lingering damage of this industry.
We are standing just in front of evaporation ponds. We call them acid mine drainage evaporation ponds from the old mine shafts, coal mine shafts. It contains heavy metals, dissolved heavy metals, such as zinc, such as copper, aluminum, and so forth. But what is worse, this water is untreated. It flows into the river, untreated, and mixes with the water in the river and consumed by community members down the stream.
Coal mining in eMalahleni started in 1896. Over a century later, the effects are still being felt by communities in the soil they live on, the water they drink, and the air they breathe.
The coal mining industry is not sustainable at all. It's about time that South Africans wake up and we need to smell the coffee and say alternatives, renewable energy, wind turbines, solar panels, agroecology must be key.
South Africa is the world's 7th largest producer and consumer of coal in the world, yielding an average of 224 million tons of coal each year. The country exports roughly 28% of this, but the majority, 72%, is sold domestically, firing up the power stations of the state-owned electricity provider, Eskom. Africa's biggest carbon emitter of greenhouse gases is feeling the pressure to retire its aging fleet of coal-fired power stations and seize investments in new coal projects. An announcement earlier this year from Chinese President Xi Jinping may help propel South Africa's efforts.
China will step up support for other developing countries in developing green and low-carbon energy, and will not build new coal-fired power projects abroad.
According to the CEO of Eskom, the announcement is in line with the state power utility's own shifting objectives.
We cannot disguise the fact that Eskom is in fact a very large emitter, not only of carbon, but also of sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, as well as particulate matter. And we therefore have a duty to clean up the environment. The best way to protect the health and also to create future job opportunities and stimulate the economic environment in Mpumalanga is precisely to engender this just energy transition.
South Africa's just transition includes decommissioning coal mines, creating new jobs for mine workers, investing in renewable energy, and ultimately achieving a net zero emissions target by 2050. In South Africa's Western Cape province, a unique partnership between South African firm BTE Renewables and Chinese firm Goldwinds highlights the potential of China-Africa cooperation in the renewable energy sector. Barely a year old, the Excelsior wind farm in Swellendam is contributing clean energy directly into Eskom's national grid.
2020 December, we begin to production. We calculate we have benefit around 20,000 families per year. So that is very promising.
The Excelsior wind farm hopes to be a positive addition to this community, providing power as well as jobs and social development.
Goldwind, they have a policy that they only want people from the community, the local communities. They supply the jobs, and then I can sort my family out. I can provide for my family.
This is a rural school, and most of the kids come from farms around the school, and the parents and all the kids fall under low economic circumstances. They live with the basics. When BTE and Goldwyn invest in our school, we will be able to get our learners to universities and to higher education institutions. And I think it will also have a great impact on our community.
True to China's own climate agenda, companies like Goldwyn's serve as catalysts to Africa's green transition.
We always focus on the clean energy, and our main goals is from China and benefit the world. We do a lot of projects all over the world, and we are willing to helping the countries who focus on the clean energy.
For South Africa, breaking the coal dependency cycle is crucial for the climate and the health of communities.
We now have a very special video to share with you.
At this year's COP26 summit, the country's president announced an $8.5 billion deal to help end its reliance on coal and meet its 2050 climate pledge.
Bold action must start with accelerated decarbonization of our energy systems. This involves harnessing new technologies to reduce our dependence on high-emission fossil fuels, including unabated coal power.
By 2050, we will have between 78 and 85% renewable energy sources installed, some limited natural gas. There could be some legacy coal in that mix, but our forecasts are for a massive migration to renewable energy sources.
Coal has been a critical commodity in Africa, but its benefits are far outweighed by the cost to the environment and communities. But through key partnerships and with the abundant supply of wind and sun, Africa is uniquely positioned to transition to renewable energy, bringing power and progress to Africa for a clean and resilient future. Lindy Mtongana, CGTN, South Africa.
Let's now head back to Sudan, where military leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has named a council to steer the transition following last month's military takeover. The council would consist of 4 military generals. Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo will remain as deputy head of council. The council also includes army commanders, former rebel leaders, and new civilian members. The appointment of the representative of Eastern Sudan has, however, been postponed until the completion of consultations on it. The decree is effective from the date of its signature. For more, we are now joined by Naba Mukhiddin, who is speaking to us from Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Naba, tell us more about this council. What is its mandate, and are there any timelines?
Hi, Hannah. Yes, there is the council formed out of 14 members. Headed by Burhan and the Deputy General Daglo and 3 other military generals who were in the same council that was dissolved. Also, there is different ethnic group representatives. They always postponed or delayed the representative of Eastern Sudan because there is conflict of who will represent Eastern Sudan. And because of that issue, we saw the port was blocked by the protesters in the last month and on September also. Also, there is representatives from different regions and ethnic groups and different religions. Reaction to this unilateral decision, pro-democracy groups just marched in the streets and called for people to join in Saturday marches. People right now are marching and they're tired against this unilateral decision because this means that the negotiations are only about negotiations with the Prime Minister Hamdok or mediation efforts has failed. So people right now are protesting against this unilateral decision.
Thank you so much for giving us those details. Naba Muhyiddin speaking to us from Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Well, before we go to a short break, we're going to hand over to Rama for the latest in business.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. South Africa's finance minister cuts funding for state-owned enterprises in order to trim the country's budget deficit in his maiden medium-term budget statement. And we'll be reviewing Egypt's 4th transportation fair, which has just wrapped up in Cairo.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Aviation, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
See, business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in South Africa. The country's finance ministry has pledged to trim the fiscal deficit and to tackle debt in its mid-term budget statement. Now, it adds that it will not commit to net long-term spending despite a windfall as far as taxes are concerned from high commodity prices. Now, remember, this comes as the country's economy is trying to grow back strongly in 2021 following a rise in the global demand for its exports, especially its commodities. Treasury adds that it will stick to a fairly disciplined fiscal strategy and set a new target of narrowing the deficit to around 4.9% of GDP by the 2024-2025 fiscal year. It has also forecast GDP growth of 5.1% in 2021 compared to the 3.3% forecast back in February. Up north, Egypt's 4th transport fair has wrapped up. The 3-day event was dedicated to exploring the potential application of smart transportation tech across the Middle East and North Africa. And it covered everything from high speeds to metro rail and even the use of natural gas as a transition fuel for public transport. Here's CGTN's Adel Mahrouki with this report.
Going by the transportation innovations to be introduced soon in his country, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi was keen to attend Transmia 2021. Egypt is currently building 14 new smart cities. The country wants to facilitate commutes to these new destinations.
From railroad to underground projects, the monorail, the high-speed train with its various destinations and means to reach the new administrative capital. There's a huge transportation development that is connecting all parts of Egypt. This requires technological solutions to ease the citizens' commute, especially that the trip will include different means of transportation.
The government says it's investing some $105 billion in developing transportation infrastructure and introducing green modes of mobility. According to rankings by the Global Economy, the quality of roads in Egypt leaped from 118th in 2014 to 28th currently in global ranking. Both are seen as indications of the potential Egypt has in the transportation sector.
It is very promising, and we see it as there will be already showing this dedicated area for the transportation is showing that there will be a huge improvement and a huge development in the transportation area. We're very happy to come here to join and to present our solution. We see Egypt as a very good country to offer our services to.
After finalizing tests, the government hired us and the Ministry of Military Production to convert all of the state-owned buses to run on natural gas instead of diesel. It's the biggest project of its kind in Egypt. We made that deal through this exhibition. We need to make people aware about the next generations of technologies. It's the only way we can keep track with the innovations and development happening in other parts of the world.
Egypt's transportation ministers signed 10 agreements during Transmea 2021. He also launched the first universal smart transportation card in Egypt, which will make commuters for the first time use one card while using any form of public transport. The event also included a forum that looks into domesticating transportation industries in the Middle East and Africa. This is the 4th edition of Transmea. It is held alongside ICT, the biggest information technology and communication exhibition in the country. The interest the Egyptian government showed and the potential it has in green and smart transportation solutions has encouraged more than 250 companies from 20 countries and more than 80,000 visitors to join the event. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
All right, then on to East Africa now. Here in Kenya, life seems to be returning to normal following the further easing of pandemic restrictions recently announced by the country's president, Uhuru Kenyatta. Now, the move came as a result of a decrease in the country's infection rates and report of high numbers of COVID-19 vaccinations as well. CGTN visited the country's capital, Nairobi, for a closer look at the impact that the easing of these restrictions is having on the city.
The country has been opened. The business now is back. Everybody, although everybody is wearing mask, but the country is now automatically obvious. The business is running smoothly. So I am vaccinated. I'm waiting for the second dose, which is coming next month.
I think the COVID situation is going down now because so many people are wearing masks and so many people are being vaccinated.
Kenya has also extended operating hours for both bars and restaurants. That's effectively made it easier for Kenyans to shop and operate as they please without worrying about having to chase a curfew of 10 p.m. Shoppers, however, are still required to wear masks and maintain social distancing while they buy their goods.
Basically, during the curfew time, we used to have few customers because some of those customers are caught up on traffic. They are not able to make it on time. But since the government lifted up the curfew, now customers have enough time to purchase. They are no longer in a hurry. They come even at 10 and they can still get our services. You know, there are even some of our branches which are operating in 24 hours, town branches. So still our customers are happy this time. There is an increase in the number of customers because they can get the service anytime.
All right, then let's move on at this particular point in time to Cote d'Ivoire. The award-winning biowaste converters over there are essentially helping farmers to turn mountains of agricultural byproducts into compost for their fields or gas for their cooking stoves as well. As CGTN's Nokutule Shabalala now reports, this is quite the step in achieving carbon neutrality and diversifying households away from high-emission biomass like firewood and charcoal.
Turning waste into gas or compost has been a major shift for farmers in Côte d'Ivoire, thanks to the Kubeko bio-waste converter. The process includes adding organic matter, sawdust and cocoa pods. You then mix everything together in the Kubeko box and wait for a month.
We will easily reach 40 tons per hectare per year because with this fertilizer, it is natural, it is organic, it's appropriate for our ground, for our fields. We expect to triple our production.
The dry waste contains carbon, the wet waste contains nitrogen. Together, it makes a good mix. Founder of the Kubeko box, No Ngusan, says he saw an opportunity to make use of the 30 million tons of waste generated by crop production in the West African country each year, and other waste like animal dung.
Lono's ambition is to make the valorization of organic waste accessible to everyone, not only in Côte d'Ivoire or Africa, but everywhere, because it's a raw material that everyone has access to. So the gas that is coming out of here is injected into the bag. We see here a bag with a volume of 1.5 cubic meters, more or less, and it can burn for 2 hours. So the 1 cubic meter Kubeko here can fill up the bag twice.
The invention of the Kubeko box has netted Ngosan an invention award with over $33,000 from the Royal Academy of Engineering. At the time, his team had already installed 50 composters at Ivorian cocoa, palm oil and mango farms, working to lower production costs from $800 to $700 to help make it affordable for potential customers.
Today, the demand is real, but the pilot project showed something. It enabled us to confirm that buying a Kubeko is a profitable investment for a farmer. So the question was, would buying the equipment enable you to be cost-effective?
Under the initiative, the company also produces biodigesters that can fuel 2 hours of cooking on the gas generated from 5 kilograms of waste per day, while producing liters of liquid compost. According to a 2018 report by the European Commission, this kind of gas could be a sustainable alternative source of cleaner energy in rural areas in West Africa. Nokutule Shabalala, CGTN.
And finally, earlier in the week, over 130 countries pledged to end or reverse deforestation by 2030. Signatories to that particular agreement from here in Africa included the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's home to about 60% of Central Africa's forest cover. Deforestation worldwide, however, did increase after a similar pledge back in 2014. So why will this deal be any different, perhaps with nearly $20 billion worth of funding pledged? Or is looking at Africa's forests as a global carbon sink perhaps the wrong framing? Here's part of my conversation on that with Anzetse Were of FSD Kenya.
I don't necessarily know if I buy into Africa being a carbon sink for the global north. I don't, that sort of makes me quite, I just sort of question the fundamental logic of that. I think that the issue for us is more about the value of the biodiversity and the important role that forests and trees and particularly rainforests have for us as Africans. I think for me, that's the importance, more than being a carbon sink for the global north. And I think if we are able to really bring an African view and say these are natural assets, not because they bring value to other parts of the world, but because we find them valuable and that they're important for us and our livelihoods and the welfare of our people, I think then we can have a much more balanced conversation than Africans being told we need to be a carbon sink.
And when it comes to the money question, because part of the problem around these conversations with climate financing is that the cash that's available often is either hard to get, or when you do get it, it's pretty expensive. There's a premium that often tends to come in with any kind of debt that comes into Africa as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's the point I raised, because of the two big issues that we're seeing really prevent us to tap into the climate finance. The first is the fact that it's very formal, it's very structured. And the bulk of our private sector is quite, informal, it's quite SME driven. As a result, when you're coming with these very formal, structured products that have high due diligence requirements, high reporting requirements, you're effectively locking out the bulk of African players, really. We're really coming to a stage, especially with climate change, where obviously Africa has played a marginal role in creating this massive problem. It's really important that we start developing the financial vehicles that allow our private sector and allow the communities to pull in the money in a manner that allows them to meet the very localized strain that they're dealing with. Because that's the part of the conversation people forget. For Africa, it's not about consumer behavior or goals around carbon, it's about lives and income.
Yeah, because for a lot of households, for example, if you're talking about the energy dimension, I mean, biomass, firewood and charcoal is a main source of energy that's used by a lot of Kenyan households. So simply saying, well, switch over to gas, and yet gas, relatively speaking, is a lot more expensive for a lot of these households. Yeah. That doesn't take into account the nuance around incomes and livelihoods in markets like ours.
Yeah, I know, and that's an expenditure problem. If you're talking about an income problem, that's why I see most of the pressure is that we have got to buffer people's livelihoods. People who, 47%, for example, 47% of our labor still derives some sort of income from agriculture. While our GDP, is around now 20-25% of the rebasing, a bulk of our labor still derives a bunch of their income from some sort of agricultural activity. And so when you're not providing them with the tools, whether it's the financial vehicles or other tools, to be more resilient to climate change, to the changing weather patterns, what you're really doing is relegating people to desperation.
And we'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. In global business, we'll be heading into the world of aviation. Boeing has reached a compensation deal with the families of the 157 people who died when its 737 MAX aircraft went down in March 2019 in Ethiopia. We'll have the details and the reactions to that settlement at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Rama. Well, let's now take a short break and return your sport news, including Paralympic athlete Oscar Pistorius' parole process begins in South Africa.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, in sport, Oscar Pistorius, South Africa's double amputee sprinter who was sentenced to prison for murdering his girlfriend, is eligible for parole. Earlier this week, Correctional Services Department said Pistorius had served half his sentence, which allows him to automatically qualify for parole under South African law. Pistorius shot and killed Riva Steenkamp through a locked bathroom door in February of 2013, claiming that he thought that she was an intruder. One of the crucial parts of the process is for Pistorius to have a successful dialogue with the victim's parents.
The offender and the victim's family are going to face each other face to face, and then the offender will put forward whether he's sorry or not, or has regrets or not. I cannot speak for them. I don't know what's going to happen in that meeting, but the whole idea behind victim-offender dialogue is restorative justice. And one can only hope. We all know, Barry has said many times that he has questions for Oscar.
Yes, he's excited at the prospect of being released on parole, but he will never be able to undo what he's done. And society will always be looking at him, no matter where he goes in life, with regard to what he has done. So that is a punishment that he will take with him to the grave.
Well, in Kenya, Sports Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed has disbanded the Football Kenya Federation to pave way for investigations following allegations of gross financial impropriety. The Cabinet Secretary, who had on a Thursday morning received the audit report on FKF from the Sports Registrar, acted swiftly, naming a 15-member caretaker committee to run football for the next 6 months. The report also calls for a special audit of the accounts of FKF and subsequent future audits. Well, speaking to the media on a Thursday afternoon, Football Kenya Federation President Nick Mwendwa hit back at the Ministry of Sport, saying that the decision to disband the federation was illegal and would not stop his office from continuing to serve football in the country.
When someone is elected in office and we have not been found guilty of anything, some minister who clearly does not know what she's doing cannot show up and arbitrarily just decide to remove us from office. It is wrong and it is illegal. We conform to FIFA statutes and CAF as well. And it is wrong that before any court of law pronounces anyone guilty of anything, that you go and pronounce to remove them in office arbitrarily. Everybody is here to do the right thing. We have done the right things. We have given access to the federation. We have provided information. When called upon by Parliament, we have gone. We have done everything the way we should do. So we need no protection from anyone. So I don't want to talk about what FIFA can do. I want to leave that to FIFA. And when they tell us what to do or what they think we should do, then we will do.
In cricket, New Zealand reached the 2020 World Cup final with a 5-wicket victory over England in the first semi-final in Abu Dhabi on Wednesday. Daryl Mitchell smashed an unbeaten 72 and Jimmy Neesham provided the late assault as New Zealand chased down their 167-run victory target